to a very special episode of Sales Talk TV show, the show where we talk about all things sales. I've got a really, really special guest for us on this episode. It's Dr. Will Baldry of Courageous, the founder of Courageous. And he's going to tell us a little bit about what Courageous is all about when I hand over the mic to him. But I put a post into my Facebook group. It's the Sales Mindset group, where I have a range of 1,500 or so business owners that talk about sales and challenges and things that are on their minds. And of course, right now we're in a very different place to where we were 7 weeks ago. And Will offered, because he's part of that group, said, I think I got something that could be of interest to the community. So Will and I had a call last week, I think it was, Will, where we sort of talked around, what that might look like. And I thought, wow, this is too good to miss. So Will is here, Dr. Will Baldry, founder of Courageous. Tell us, Will, about what it is that you do.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. That's a great introduction. I help people to build the psychological resources that link with performance and success in business. So these are resources like confidence and resilience and self-belief and self-discipline primarily. So yeah, it's the kind of mindset and motivation side of running a business.
Wow. I mean, we sit around in a world of instant access to media, be that the media that's forced upon us, be that the media that we choose to consume in our feeds. And I've seen so much of that media almost like dip on a roller coaster of optimism and hope, disaster, despair, all of these things. So those words you use in your introduction about confidence, resilience, and self-discipline, I mean, I can't see them being more relevant now than or more relevant in your consciousness now than maybe in your subconsciousness. But you work with loads of business owners, businesses, as you introduced. So with that backdrop, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges that we face as business owners right now?
Yeah, so with talking specifically in relation to sales, I think a couple of the biggest challenges that I come across are a kind of emotional resistance to selling, and also building the self-discipline, as we said, the self-control to consistently follow through on your sales activity. And we're talking about business owners who wear a lot of hats and have a lot of roles and responsibilities within their business, and often selling is the bit that you're less comfortable, less passionate about. It can easily kind of fall by the wayside when you've got a huge amount on your plate of things that you could be doing.
I mean, let's dig into that, because you might have heard me say that part of what I'm about is breaking that stigma of sales. And I talk about that stigma from the point of how it makes you feel, right? Because there's been so much going on in the profession of selling that we probably all have in our immediate memories of examples of where it felt horrible, right?
Yeah,
and you used words about less comfortable and less passionate. Can you open that up a bit from where you think some of that comes from?
Yeah, okay. So I think I mean, I think the activity of selling itself is the same as any activity we might engage in. I think it's what we believe about the activity that can cause us to find it uncomfortable or to have some kind of resistance to following it through. A phrase that I hear quite often is I hate the idea of selling myself. Right. Which straight away points to an attachment that isn't true. You're not selling yourself; you're selling a product or a service. So straight away there's a kind of an underlying false belief there that creates some emotional difficulty around the activity. But yeah, I always think there's it's really easy to feel like the activity or the stress or the difficulty with the activity is imposed upon you by the outside world, whereas it's actually your reaction to the outside world, and it's what you believe about the activity and those mental attachments that you've formed around doing the activity, if that makes sense.
I mean, it does. I mean, there's this whole feeling around, let's just take prospecting, right? Yeah. So I don't like selling myself. Well, prospecting is probably the sales activity that is the most vulnerable and raw of sales of the sales process, right? Because you might not have any kind of relationship, knowledge, rapport with that individual that picks up the phone. And this is where I think this is really interesting that you talk about this, because I often try and remind people to disassociate yourself from the outcome, because the outcome isn't actually personal, right? The fact
Absolutely.
The fact that somebody hasn't necessarily gone, oh wow, Will, that's amazing, can we have 100 of them? It doesn't mean that what you've done is wrong. Your approach, persona, skills, process, whatever, but you're taking it personal, right? So you're internalizing the outcome and I guess blaming yourself in a way that it didn't go wrong, it didn't go right. So so perhaps the easiest thing to do is say, I don't like that activity, I don't like doing that. And so it's interesting. Do you find that?
I agree 100% with what you're saying there. Yeah, because I think a lot of the time what we might be worrying about in that situation is how another person is going to react to us. Okay. And I often ask people, you can imagine delivering your pitch or your sales message, and you can imagine being in a situation where somebody really connects with that and is really interested in what you're talking about and wants to know more. And you can also imagine saying exactly the same things and behaving exactly the same way, and somebody else reacting completely differently to it, maybe being rude to you or just not being interested at all. And when you realize that you could be behaving exactly the same in both situations, well, what does either reaction actually tell you about you as a person? And this can be a really liberating realization, I think, when you notice that how other people react to you is nothing to do with you.
Yeah. I guess that doesn't give you an invitation to act inappropriately. No. And take, but that's of course where we find some of the more unethical aspects of selling at the top of the sales funnel take place, right? Where people aren't necessarily dialing those people who have a genuine, or they believe have a genuine want or need for their product or service. They're actually playing a numbers game, or they're selling something that is a bit like the snake oil chapter in my book, where any solution will fit as long as, and I'll make it be this one.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I find that really, a really important distinction to instantly bring your work to the relevance of salespeople, right? So, and business owners, if we're getting our mindset right about the activities and disassociating the outcome from our personal selves, then that kind of sets us up in a good place. And therefore, I probably take the question to a very specific, so why is recognizing these things important as an individual? Okay, we make more sales, we get more results, but broader than that, why is it important that you find do something about these things, not only for your business but for your personal life, I imagine?
Yeah. Well, I just want to backtrack a little bit to what you were saying about the identifying the right prospects and not just twisting your offer to meet whatever problem they might be experiencing. I think going into it with that kind of ethical position, that you are, wanting to help the right people and find out if what you do is relevant to that person in a kind of compassionate state, then I think that also is going to make you much less resistant to doing it. I think that's another really good point. So I just wanted to pick up on that.
No, I mean, hold that, because we will come back to the question that I asked before we went back. But let's stay in that. One of the important parts of the Sales Mindset Coach syllabus that we talk about very, very, very early on is knowing who your ideal client is, right? Because if you know who your ideal client is from a sales perspective, and clearly from a psychological perspective as well, not only do you go into that with more confidence, you're also therefore portraying values and solutions that make the conversation far more easy to have. And it's just that self-fulfilling prophecy then, isn't it? I want to listen to you because you understand me. You understand my problems. You can help me. I think this is a fundamentally important part. The very, very beginning of my sales syllabus is always recognizing who it is that wants or needs your product or service. So it was a good catch.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Yeah, brilliant.
So if you can remember my long question before, it was why is it important that we recognize it, but then do something about it?
Yeah, and I think that's a really kind of insightful question, because I think developing the self-awareness around what's going on for us is it gives us the power to change things, and often these things can be very opaque to us. The certain activities might just kind of get left without us really digging into what it is that's going on there for us, and that can perpetuate over a long period of time without us really paying attention to it. So that's worth I think that's worth kind of underlining with what I was saying before about it's what you believe about the activity rather than the activity itself. That should be an empowering realization rather than one that you beat yourself up about or criticize yourself for. But as you say, there's a kind of obvious outcome, which is growing your business and making more sales. And when we go into developing self-discipline or emotional resilience or whatever it is, that's probably the outcome that we're thinking of creating, the thing that we think we want. But I think you're absolutely right that there is a bigger prize on offer. Those things will we can achieve those things by building self-discipline, etc. But I think there's a bigger prize on offer, which is building an identity for yourself as the kind of person who is able to follow through on your intentions day to day and be productive in a way that allows you to enjoy your time off and
yeah. I mean, I've seen this in my career with good coaches and bad coaches. Yeah, a good coach kind of gets this and the need to build security and safety. The bad coaches focus on the results.
yeah.
And in a minute, I'm probably going to ask you a bit about, well, how do you identify those gaps and how do you go about building resilience? But I just hover a bit on how just simple things in sales, I guess, can have that yin and yang effect of pressure or bad emotions, right? So competition in a team, being the top performer and the poor performer. It doesn't mean that the top performer's the best salesperson. It doesn't mean the poor performer's the worst salesperson. There's something in there that could be underlying an issue. So having competition in your team is good, but if only you're prepared to do something about it, not just run a competition. And I think the other one, when I look at businesses and I think about targets, setting sales targets. There's this huge debate in the sales profession whether actually an individual target is a good thing or a bad thing, because it drives a result. It doesn't drive a behavior. And, and people often look at KPIs in their business as what they need to achieve. That is just the moment of measurement. That's all it is. So I've seen, as I mentioned, I've seen good leaders and bad leaders use competition, targets, KPIs to create amazing sales teams and sales performance. But I've seen others use them to create incredibly bad, well, a reflection of themselves, really, more than anything else. So it really touches me what you're saying here. But it leads to that point about how do I get to this moment of then saying to my boss or to myself, help me. How do we get to that point?
And I that's again completely agree with what you're saying there, because meeting a target is a single moment, and then it's on to the next target, or and I suppose we've been trained to think this way from early in our lives, haven't we? You get told, you get good GCSEs and you'll be set up for life, but then you do that and you get told, oh, well, actually you have to get good A levels, or well, now you have to get into a good university, now you have to get a good job, but now you have to get promotion, and Sean Aker calls it pushing happiness over the cognitive horizon. It's a nice phrase, I think. But so, ways to be positive and fulfilled in the moment, I think is a much better underpinning for success than constantly chasing a target that's in the future. So, I mean, when I'm working with people, we're very often looking at attachments to habitualized patterns of thought and attention that are no longer helpful to you. And I don't particularly like to think about quote unquote negative thoughts or emotions, because all of these things exist because they were helpful to you at some previous time. And often if you have a kind of pattern of thought that isn't particularly helpful right now, it's often come from a very creative and resourceful part of yourself that actually kept you safe from something in the past. So that'll probably make a bit more sense if I give an example.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
So so something that comes up for me occasionally as an attachment that people have is well, I don't want to get a question that I don't know the answer to. You know, I'm worried about this conversation because I might feel out of my depth if they ask something that I don't know what the answer to is. And so we can kind of maneuver around that, because if we sit with that idea of getting a question that you don't know the answer to, you can start to realise ways in which that's a really positive thing. I mean, how great to have somebody perfectly point out to you a gap in your knowledge that you can go away and make yourself even more knowledgeable in a way that's absolutely relevant to the prospects that you're talking to. So actually getting a question that you don't know the answer to, once we dig into that concept for a little while, we realise that it's quite a good thing, you know. And so, yeah, that's the kind of way that I'm manoeuvring around these attachments. And then, of course, there's always something underneath that. So, you know, getting a question that you don't know the answer to, well, why is that bad? Okay, well, they might think that I don't know what I'm talking about. Okay, so there's another attachment that we can start to question, start to work on, you know. And then again, what's underneath that? Why is that a bad thing? And you go down through the layers and look at the various different things that are going on.
Yeah, I mean, again, I find this fascinating, because if you have this position that you've formed, again, it's just feeding that reticence to have the conversation and ask the questions, right? So, and one of the things in selling, of course, is, you know, asking those right questions drives the sales process forward. I mean, listening to the answers is critical as well. But if you've got a fear or an apprehension that the response might make you vulnerable, there is an element of preparation and research that you probably should do as an individual beforehand. But there is a strength, isn't there, in not knowing everything. And yeah, and I find one of the things in selling that's starting to become pervasive in a way is the immediate expert syndrome, right? So everybody pops up as a guru of their profession, making promises of instant results, actually playing into the almost the dark side, if we were to use a Star Wars analogy, that they're manipulating the emotion, they're manipulating the position, which, whether that's deliberate or whether that's unintentional, I think we have to be very cognizant of that. And probably leads me to the question about, you know, with the current pandemic, we're all in lockdown, and I've seen so much of this promise and hope. You know, hope is such a powerful sales emotion. It's you should see hope littered all through people's sales copy. But this is more relevant right now, right, in this pandemic. What would be your advice around this space just now?
Yeah, and sorry to backtrack again, but one more, because I love what you're saying there about the instant expert thing, because I've another aspect of, you know, being asked a question that you don't know the answer to is I've sometimes on one of my courses that I run, we talk about credibility of information and sources and experts, and who do we find credible and why. And quite often people say that they find me credible because I don't always have an instant answer to everything. You know, they said that the fact that you sometimes say, well, I can't answer that right now, but I will find out about it and come back to you, is something that people find really credible. You know.
Yeah. Well, no, and it's a good catch again, because if I'm buying something and you say that, you're adding value, right? Because you're researching, you're finding out my unique problem, and I think therefore there is a inherent flaw in being the expert, potentially. Yeah. Nice one. Yeah. So just jumping back to that piece about the pandemic. How do you see all of this now just becoming more relevant?
I mean, I think on the side of maybe emotional resistance to selling, that's probably become more pronounced. We might be more worried about bad reactions to our sales messages and that type of thing. On the other side, with the self-discipline piece, I think there's a great, I mean, without wanting to make light of a situation that's obviously quite scary and tragic for people, it's I think there is an opportunity here to kind of put our habits and routines under the microscope, and we've all had probably a lot of distractions cut from our lives, So and I think I mean, you and me were talking on a call last week about there is an opportunity here to get really clear about what it is that we sell. If I think that I'm selling seminars and workshops and speeches, obviously none of that is possible right now. So, but that's not really the thing that I sell. What is the transformation that people can achieve once they engage with my material is getting clear on that has been quite interesting over the last few weeks. And I think that helps with the emotional side of selling as well. If I'm thinking about selling a ticket to a workshop, then I'll have all these thoughts about, well, does someone really want to do that and give up 2 hours of their day? But if I'm clear about the transformation it provides, then of course people will want that. That's
and I mean, the psychology of selling is something that is being tested, I think, today. The purest of questions, should I be selling right now, is very very poignant, and I don't think there are many people out there saying go fill your boots, but there certainly are people that are capitalizing on the situation. There are some that are selling a very relevant service, solution, or product that just happens to mean at the moment they're in a place where it's in demand. There is something here about being genuine and authentic, and being very, to your point, very very clear on what it actually is that you are selling. And if you do have some of those psychological barriers in place, now is a really good time, whilst we've got the time, to talk to somebody like yourself to help break through some of that limitation that you've put potentially in front of your own success, right? I would suggest.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've also found it's become a lot clearer to me in the last few weeks that the amount of time I have each week for focused activity, and if I say yes to this particular project, then I have to pay for it in time that I could be spending on something else. It seems that those things have become much more apparent. I don't know, when your schedule's much busier, you maybe pay less attention to those things. But I mean, maybe behind every
or many people, I can't say everybody, but many people, there is an underlying view of themselves. And that underlying view feeds some of your reticence, or some of your courage, some of your anxieties. And you know deep down, right, that you could do something about that. And in a business sense and a sales sense, that could liberate some other good thing in your life, right? So financial, making more money is one outcome, but not the motivation. Potentially the motivation is to look after your family or have a wonderful holiday or whatever it is. So I think there is this point that people know maybe deep down, but I would advocate very strongly reaching out to people like yourself to try and work through some of the techniques, using the resources that you have to really unlock the potential, or unleash the potential even within yourselves.
I think you've hit a really kind of pertinent point there, because I think any change in our habits or routines or behaviour is driven by a change in identity, a change in our sense of who we are, you know, and that those changes in identity can make things much easier. It's not a business example, but an example I often use there is giving up smoking, where I think the sense of personal identity really comes into play. If you believe that you are a smoker who's really trying hard not to have a cigarette, that's a really difficult and effortful thing. But if you believe that you're a non-smoker who still occasionally has a craving, that's far easier to enact, you know. So yeah, I think it's an idea that James Clear talks about a lot in his work on habits. The idea that these are changes of identity underpinning changes of behaviour. Yeah.
So I mean that's interesting. I mean that's potentially another episode, because I think that becomes a very important aspect in how you deal with a promotion at work, because you have a different role, you have a different responsibilities, you have a different identity within the company. A sales account manager versus a sales manager, or a key account manager versus a global key account manager might just be words to some people, but for others it's a huge change in themselves. That could indeed be another episode of Sales Talk. Look, we've covered so much through our time so far, but I'd like you, just before you leave people, how they can get in touch with you in this time where we've got time, in this time where selling is still required and people are taking on different shapes and personas of how they're doing this, in the time of the pandemic and lockdown. What would be your, I don't know, let's just say your 3 top tips for people watching this to get into the subject?
So I think, I think one of my top kind of quick wins is something we've talked about already, which is recognizing that the way people react to you is nothing to do with you. That's been such a bombshell to a lot of people that I've worked with, you know, and it's you know, to realize that it's to do with how they're making you up to be in their own minds, and how they're making themselves up to be, and how they're making up their values and morals and beliefs to be, and various other environmental factors that you have no knowledge of whatsoever, you know. So I think that's I also think it's worth reiterating that I think introspection should always be done non-judgmentally, you know, not criticizing yourself for anything that you find. A good quick tip, I think, if you're trying to if you've decided to commit to some kind of consistent sales activity, and it's something that you could get distracted from by doing other business activities instead, or it's something that might fall by the wayside or has fallen by the wayside in the past. I think one really powerful technique can be, once you schedule it in, Monday to Friday at 10 to 11 or whatever the slot is that you've devoted to this activity, make it the only thing that you're allowed to do in that time. Mm-hmm. Because when it comes to it in the moment, it's really easy to talk yourself into doing a different business-related activity instead. Whereas if you make the choice between sitting on a chair doing nothing or doing this sales activity that you've planned in, then the right choice becomes far more apparent to you. So I think that can be an interesting way of reframing the situation. And I think the other top tip or quick win would be to try and avoid planning your schedule on the fly. If you've planned, the night before, or maybe on the Friday before, or whatever your planning schedule looks like, if you've planned your daily activities in advance, you'll have had a much more objective view of what the most important tasks are, rather than deciding in the moment, where you'll be more easily swayed by what feels comfortable right now, rather than what's maybe the most important thing to be doing.
I mean, they are absolute crackers. I think we can all recognise those as people that are working, far more independently and individually at the moment. How those three pieces of advice will help us on a daily basis.
Great.
And I mean, it would be wrong of me to not mention this before I give the floor to you, but the Sales Mindset Coach syllabus will help you with your structure, will help you with your discipline, will help you with your planning. Yeah. So the mindset aspect of the syllabus is very much considered throughout this, throughout the program. So really aligned to what you're saying, and I do think there is another episode or two that we could cover, Will. But I mean, thank you ever so much for your time. And so people will want to reach out, want to follow you, want to get more of your content. How can they find you, Will?
It's and thanks for having me. Thank you for inviting me on. It's been a lot of fun. Dr Will Baldry's Courageous on Facebook, or I'm Dr William James Bawdry on LinkedIn. Those are probably the best places.
Best places to get you. So yeah. Facebook and LinkedIn. Fantastic. And we will, as we promote this, we'll be putting out your social media channels so people can make sure they connect with you. Thanks ever so much again, Will. So Dr Will Baldry, founder of Courageous. This has been a really interesting and insightful and illuminating episode of Sales Talk. Join us next time, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of Sales Talk TV.